Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 36 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, for this episode of Camera Position, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the idea of criticism of photography, and more specifically, the idea of criticizing your own work. And the idea for this came from a listener, Joseph Arthur, somebody who's written to me a couple of times, and he says in his email, he says, I'm not sure if you take suggestions, and I hope this isn't out of place, but I'd love to hear your view on self-critique. I often like something that I've done, and then I disregard it a few days after finding an overlooked flaw. When is self-critique a good thing, and when is it a bad thing? How can we use it to grow, and when might it slow down the growing process? And boy, this is a great idea for a podcast topic, I think, and I think there are a couple of ways to approach it. The first idea that I wanted to sort of toss out here for you is the idea of who is your critical circle? Who are the people who are looking at your work on a regular basis? Are the people who are looking at your work predominantly your friends and family, those kinds of folks who are going to likely give you the pat on the back and the sort of hail fellow, well met, good response to the work you have? You know, those kinds of people who are loved ones who are going to say nice things regardless of what it is that you've done. And certainly there's always room for ego stroking in the creative world, and certainly us, we creative folks, we are, ego driven, right? So we are interested in having people say nice things about it, about what we're doing. But I think another part of this is that we really would like to grow, and Joseph says, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in growth. So, one of the things that I might recommend is seek out other photographers. I know a number of photographers who trade work via email, whether it's people that they know or people that they don't know. There are obviously a fairly large number of photo critique sites out there on the internet. I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of those kinds of sites in general, though I do think trying to gather around you a circle of photographers who have similar interests or similar ideas, or even disparate interests, and be able to form a sort of critical circle is a useful idea. I know that probably many of the people who are out there listening to Camera Position may have gone to art school or experienced some art classes at some point in their life, and they've had that wonderful critical environment where the instructor leads critiques, and with any luck, at least in my critique sessions, with any luck, students kind of take over the critique session and begin contributing their own ideas in a kind of directed by the instructor kind of a session. So classes are a great spot to do that, but for those of you who did go to art school and maybe have been out of art school for a while, there is that problem of trying to find that kind of critical circle and trying to find that group of people who might be able to help you look at your work and make some ideas about where it's going and whether it's successful and whether it's working. So gathering around you, whether it's a physical group where you meet once a week, once a month, every 6 months, whatever it is, or whether it's a virtual group where you gather together a group of friends and colleagues in photography and share images through the internet in some way, either emailing them or posting them on a website or whatever, can be a very useful way of helping you figure out whether the work that you're doing has value to you by virtue of the kinds of commentary that you get back. Now, of course, one of the problems is that you've got to overcome that same friends and family and loved ones kind of inertia where all the commentary is of a positive nature. So you kind of have to set up some ground rules that say anything goes and anybody can comment about any kind of part of the photographic concept. And the other part that I'd like to sort of emphasize here is that these kinds of discussions often break down into certainly just talks about whether this is technically successful or whether the composition works. And what I like to try to direct people to do when when critiquing work is not just concentrate on those kinds of compositional ideas, but concentrate more on the emotional response that the picture delivers, whether it conveys the message that the photographer is interested in trying to convey, whether it does the job that the photographer was hoping that it would do, and more importantly, I think, whether that photograph fits in with what the photographer really cares about, what their particular interests are in the medium, and the way in which they go about doing the things that they do. So the idea of having a group of people critique your work is certainly one way to critique the work, but that really isn't what Joseph Arthur asked about. And I know, having heard from a number of you who live in remote parts of the world, and you don't have a lot of museums or galleries or other kinds of venues around. Let's sort of talk about where those kinds of places that you might be able to find critical response. And obviously, one of those places is going to be you, yourself. And the question that Joseph poses is, what happens when the only person who is able to critique the work on a regular basis is the person who's making the work? We obviously are very connected to what it is that we're making. I have my own personal theory about negatives. Those of you who are in photography and haven't spent much time in the darkroom won't really relate to this, but those darkroom workers out there will get this one. I've never in my life seen an ugly, wet negative. Every negative I've ever pulled out of the fixer is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it's only under that cold, harsh reality of making the contact print of that image or a test print of that image where I begin to see, it's really not that great to begin with. So there is that first sort of flow through the work and where you call out the images that don't really work all that well. And I think that there are some, for those working digitally, I think there are some great software products out there that can help you call out the images by sorting them on virtual light boxes. I frequently use iView Media Pro. I'll put a link to that in the show notes on the blog. I also have just begun to use over the recent weeks here Adobe's new product that they have out in beta form, Lightroom. I've explored Apple's Aperture, not that crazy about it, to be honest, but these kinds of software products can help us do that first cull through to sort of figure out what's good and what's not, which are the rotten apples and which ones are the keepers. But beyond that, what happens when we get to those pictures that we are excited about, we celebrate, we print them perhaps, or in some other way finish them off? How do we deal with making sure that those pictures are true to our own vision? Well, first of all, that goes back, I think, to some of the earlier comments I've made in earlier episodes of Camera Position. What do you care about? What is it as a photographer that you're really interested in? And you've got to have that foremost in your mind. What is it that you really want to convey with your imagery? What is it that that really kind of gets you going as a photographer, as a person, as a citizen of the world? So that piece is an important piece. One of the things that I often recommend to people when they are trying to figure out whether this particular photograph is successful is have some sort of a tackable surface in your workspace, or better yet, in your living space, if the people you live with can stand it. Have that sort of tackable surface up there somewhere where you can put up to be able to live with the kinds of work that you're doing on a regular basis, so that you can stick it up there and glance at it as you walk by, and maybe spend a few extra seconds if you've got a few extra seconds as you walk by. Even better if it's someplace right in front of that, that comfy chair that you sit in on a regular basis, someplace where you can contemplate these pictures over a longer period of time. Because I think one of the things that we can all agree on at some point, that a picture that may have excited us or interested us in the beginning may not end up being the picture that we're the most excited about in the end. So the idea of being able to live with your photographs and be able to kind of reevaluate them over a longer period of time than just that sort of, this is good, this is not so good, and how does it fit into the body of work. But that next piece, how does it fit into the body of work, begins to I think, become very important. And again, going back to some of the things from earlier podcasts, the idea of how does the work that I'm doing fit in with basically my ideas about life, my ideas about photography, my ideas about interaction with other people in the world. What is it that I do with this work that is my own voice, my own idea, and my own way of seeing the world? And the idea of looking at some of these pictures that we're making on a regular basis and saying, does that picture fit? Does that picture accomplish something new out of the body of work that I've created? Does it perhaps represent a new direction? Does it represent a vector off of where I am right now and perhaps something new that's going to happen? Or is it something that would fit into the existing body of work? And I think one of the things that all of us, again, might agree on is that what we see in our work is over and over these kinds of repeated thematic ideas, but also the idea that, this might be a new sort of spur of work off of the work that we've been doing. So I think self-critique is always a good thing, to respond to one of Joseph's questions. And I don't know that it's ever really a bad thing. I think that what we have to do is be brutally honest, and it's that same sort of honesty that I would hope that if you're gathering a critical circle around you, that you would hope to find people who are going to be critically honest with you and really kind of be merciless about what it is that they are telling you. And I think similarly, you need to be merciless about what you're telling yourself. It might be a beautiful photograph. It might be beautifully composed. It might be a technical success to you. But does it really convey the message you want to convey? And, just as importantly, in fact, perhaps most importantly, does it fit with your basic idea of what it is that you're trying to convey in your work? And that basic idea of what it is that you're trying to convey, I think, can come from you brainstorming about what's important to you. What do you care about? And going back to those basic notions that we've talked about before about what kinds of things in your life are the things that are the most important to you. So, critique, the idea of being able to create imagery, share that imagery with people who can help you determine whether it's a great image that works for you and works within your body of work, or whether it's an also-ran, but then also the idea of self-critique. Can you figure out a way to live with your work on a regular basis so that you see it all the time and can live with these new pieces and decide whether or not they're successful for you? Those kinds of things become, I think, very, very important. So that idea about critique and the idea about trying to think through the process of how you deliver the work that you want to deliver to the world. And does that voice seem true to your inner voice? Those ideas, I think, are very important, and one of the only ways you can do it is through self-critique. So thank you for listening to this episode of Camera Position. I'm glad you're there. I'm glad those of you who have written in. I'm especially glad for those of you who have gone to the iTunes Music Store and dropped a little note in the recommendations box there. I think that's one of the reasons that iTunes positions things in certain places on that iTunes store. So if you have a few minutes, I wouldn't mind having you go over there and drop a kind word or a critical word, because I'd like people to be brutally honest with this effort that I'm making here to produce this content, as well as the kind of photographs that I produce. So again, thanks for listening, and thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography.
PhotocastNetwork.com, your photography resource in the potosphere. PhotocastNetwork.com